Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving straight into an absolutely wild, ancient political thriller. Seriously, this narrative has the whole shebang: conspiracy, ruthless ambitions, civil war, and a downfall so poetic you literally couldn't script it better. We're looking at the story of the Bramble King. This is all about a guy named Abimelech, whose incredibly violent rise to power is matched only by his, frankly, spectacular and humiliating fall. So buckle up, because this is a masterclass in the disastrous consequences of unchecked ambition.
So, right off the bat, here's the central question we're looking at today. What actually happens when you crown a bramble? As we'll see, this text is essentially a brutal historical case study on toxic leadership. It asks what happens when a society willingly hands the reins over to a purely destructive force. Spoiler alert, it leads to mutually assured destruction. It's an ancient text for sure, but the dynamics of power and complicity we're about to unpack, they are incredibly timeless.
Okay, let's set the stage. Our main guy, Abimelech, was the son of a major leader named Jerubbaal. But here's the catch. He was one of 71 sons, born to a maidservant from the city of Shechem. He desperately wants absolute power, but, he's got 70 legitimate half-brothers standing in his way. So what does he do? He goes straight to his mother's family in Shechem with a highly manipulative political pitch. He essentially says, hey, would you rather be ruled by 70 guys or by just one? And remember, I am your bone and your flesh. He totally bypasses any talk of merit or qualifications and just leans heavily into tribalism to get their loyalty. And tragically, it works. The men of Shechem are totally swayed because, well, he's our brother. And you've got to notice the really dark symmetry in how this plays out. The men of Shechem back him up by handing over exactly 70 pieces of silver straight out of their local temple's treasury, the house of Balbereth. Armed with this religious money, Abimelech hires what the text literally calls vain and light persons, basically ruthless mercenaries. He takes this hit squad back to his father's house at Ophrah and commits an absolute atrocity. He slaughters his 70 half-brothers, all of them, upon a single stone. It's a calculated, incredibly brutal purge meant to wipe out all his political rivals in one fell swoop. But, as is usually the case, sweeping executions are rarely as perfectly clean as the tyrant hopes. There was one survivor. Just one. The youngest brother, Jotham, somehow manages to hide and escape the massacre. Meanwhile, totally oblivious to this one loose end, or maybe they just didn't care, the men of Shechem and the house of Milo gather by the plain of the pillar. Right there, with the blood barely dry, they officially crown Abimelech as their king. The unholy alliance is officially sealed. Now, when Jotham hears that the men of Shechem have actually crowned his brother's murderer, he doesn't just stay hidden. No, he climbs all the way to the top of Mount Gerizim, looks down over the city, and shouts a prophetic warning for them all to hear. And he delivers this warning through a famous, incredibly vivid parable that starts, "The trees went forth on a time to anoint a king over them." He uses this amazing nature imagery to perfectly diagnose the absolute political disaster that Shechem just invited upon themselves. It really is a brilliantly diagnostic parable. In it, the trees are looking for a ruler, so they ask the olive tree, the fig tree, and the vine to reign over them. But guess what? Every single one of them refuses. The olive won't give up its rich oil, the fig won't forsake its sweet fruit, and the vine isn't about to stop producing its cheerful wine. You see the point he's making? The productive, valuable members of society are way too busy actually creating worth to bother with the corrupting headache of absolute power. So, scraping the very bottom of the barrel, the trees ask the bramble, a thorny, completely useless weed. And the bramble greedily accepts, but with this terrifying caveat. It says, "Put your trust in my shadow." Which is absurd, right? A bramble casts literally no shade. And if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. The worthless leader demands absolute, unquestioning loyalty under the threat of total destruction. After dropping that parable, Jotham steps out of the metaphor and applies it directly to the very real situation down below. He calls out their violent treachery against his father's house, and then he drops a devastating curse. He declares that if they haven't acted with integrity, which they obviously haven't, then let fire come out from Abimelech and devour Shechem, and let fire come out from Shechem and devour Abimelech. He is formally cursing them with mutually assured destruction. This curse sets a literal ticking clock for the rest of our story. And after dropping this massive verbal bomb, Jotham rightfully flees in terror to a place called Beer, so his brother can't get to him. But that ticking clock doesn't just go off immediately. Abimelech actually manages to reign for 3 years.
But right at year 3, this unholy alliance begins to fracture. The text tells us that God sends an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. So divine retribution is officially in motion to avenge the blood of those 70 brothers. The Shechemites start dealing treacherously with their king. They literally set up ambushers in the mountains to rob anyone traveling along the local trade routes. It completely undermines Abimelech's authority and causes some massive economic chaos for his regime.
Right into the middle of all this civil unrest steps a provocateur named Gael, the son of Ebed. He arrives in Shechem, and the disgruntled citizens almost immediately put their confidence in him. Things finally hit a tipping point during the vineyard harvest. The people of Shechem are treading grapes, making merry, and they retreat into the house of their god for this big, drunken festival. Emboldened by all the wine and their new anti-Abimelech leader, the crowd starts to openly and loudly curse their king. But here's where the rebellion makes a completely fatal miscalculation. You have Gaal making these super arrogant public boasts. He's yelling to the crowd, "Would to God this people were under my hand. Then would I remove Abimelech." He is publicly daring the king to come out and fight. But listening to all of this on the sidelines is Zebul. Zebul is the ruler of the city, and he is fiercely loyal to Abimelech. His anger is kindled, for sure. So he secretly sends messengers to Abimelech, warning him that Gaal is fortifying the city and advising the king to set up an ambush by night. So now, the Bramble king is getting direct inside tactical intelligence from the very heart of the rebellion.
And wow, does that inside intelligence pay off perfectly. Acting on the tip, Abimelech sets up an ambush under the cover of night, dividing his forces into 4 companies. As morning breaks, Gaal goes out to the city gate and spots the troops coming down from the mountains. But Zebul is standing right there, and he uses some brilliant psychological manipulation. He completely gaslights Gaal, saying, "Oh, thou seest the shadow of the mountains as if they were men, just shadows." By the time Gaal realizes they actually are men, it is way too late. Zebul taunts him, basically saying, "Where's your big mouth now? Go out and fight the people you despised." So Gaal goes out, gets easily routed by Abimelech, and is chased all the way back to the gates. And then Zebul officially expels Gaal from the city.
Now, you might think that crushing the rebellion's leader would be the end of it, right? Problem solved? But remember Jotham's curse. The fire of the bramble must devour the cedars. So the very next day, the ordinary citizens of Shechem go out into the fields, probably thinking the worst of the conflict is over. But it really isn't. Abimelech gets word they are out in the open, and he ambushes these defenseless people right in the fields. Then, he turns his full fury on the city itself. He fights against Shechem all day, slaughters the inhabitants, beats the city infrastructure completely down to the ground, and finally, he sows it with salt. It is a chilling, highly calculated act meant to ensure the city remains entirely desolate forever. The alliance isn't just dead, it's buried. The human cost of this vengeance is just staggering to think about. As word spreads of the city's utter destruction, about 1,000 men and women connected to the Tower of Shechem flee for their lives. They retreat into the fortified hold of the house of their god, Berith. They're desperately hoping that these thick stone walls and the concept of religious sanctuary will protect them from the absolute carnage happening outside. Sadly, it doesn't protect them at all. And this is exactly where Jotham's prophecy is literally fulfilled. Abimelech hears that 1,000 people are hiding in the stronghold, so he leads his men up to Mount Zalmon. He takes an axe, cuts down a thick tree bough, hoists it onto his shoulder, and orders his entire army to do the exact same thing. They carry all these heavy branches down to the hold, pile them up against the walls and the doors, and set the whole thing ablaze. All 1,000 men and women trapped inside the tower die in the flames. The fire of the bramble has literally devoured the very people who anointed him.
Now, totally blood-drunk and completely unchecked, the violence just keeps going. Abimelech isn't satisfied with Shechem. He immediately marches his army to a nearby town called Thebez. He attacks the city and takes it, but just like in Shechem, there is a strong tower inside the city limits. All the men, women, and citizens of Thebez flee inside it, shut themselves in, and climb all the way up to the roof of the tower to escape him.
Abimelech, probably thinking he can just repeat his exact same brutal tactic, approaches this new tower. He fights his way hard right up to the heavy wooden door, fully intending to burn this tower to the ground, just like he did the last one. But right here, we reach this incredible, dramatic climax. High above him on the roof, an unnamed certain woman grabs a piece of a heavy millstone, one of those massive stones used for grinding grain, and she casts it straight down onto Abimelech's head. The text notes it with this grim finality, and all to break his skull.
This seemingly unstoppable tyrant is fatally crushed in an instant by an anonymous civilian who was just defending her home.
Which brings us to one of the most deeply ironic moments in this entire narrative. Lying there in the dirt, his skull fractured, knowing full well he is dying, Abimelech's only concern is his own toxic, masculine ego. He hastily calls out to his young armor-bearer, commanding him, "Draw thy sword and slay me, that men say not of me, a woman slew him." Even in his gasping final moments, he is desperately trying to control his warrior legacy. The young man obeys and thrusts him through, but the cover-up fails completely. Thousands of years later, absolutely nobody remembers the armor-bearer's sword. History completely remembers the millstone, the woman who threw it, and the total poetic justice of the Bramble King's humiliating downfall.
Once the men of Israel see that Abimelech is officially dead, the army just dissolves. Everyone packs up and goes home. And the source text makes very sure that we do not miss the point of this whole event. This entire bloody saga is explicitly framed as direct divine retribution. It says, "Thus God rendered the wickedness of Abimelech, and all the evil of the men of Shechem did God render upon their heads. The scales of justice are balanced. Both the toxic leader and his complicit enablers are severely punished for that initial treacherous slaughter of the 70 brothers."
Which brings us right back to our ticking clock from the beginning. Remember Jotham, the youngest brother, standing up on that mountain 3 years prior? His prophetic curse was perfectly, terrifyingly realized. The alliance that was formed in blood dissolved in blood. The fire of the Bramble destroyed the citizens of Shechem, and ultimately the violent fire that originated from that conflict in Shechem led directly to the crushing of Abimelech. They mutually destroyed each other, exactly as he warned they would. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final thought derived from this ancient text. The story of the Bramble King isn't just some historical footnote about a millstone and a crushed skull. It is a profound, glaring warning about complicity. When we knowingly put our trust in destructive, self-serving leaders who operate without any real substance, who demand absolute loyalty while threatening fire, can we truly escape the fire that inevitably follows? It's a question Jotham asked thousands of years ago, and frankly, it remains just as relevant today. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and remember to always keep questioning the nature of leadership around you.